The barn was already burning when Nora realized her husband wasn't the enemy. Flames tore through the night sky, eating timber and hay with a hunger that matched the rage in Garrett Mercer's eyes. Silas stood in the doorway, barely stood, really, his crippled leg trembling, his face carved with pain and something darker. Behind him, his older brother smiled. This wasn't an accident, it was an execution. But here's the thing about desperate women and broken men. Sometimes they refuse to die quietly. Welcome to a story about survival, secrets, and the kind of love that grows in ashes. If you're ready to see how a widow with nothing and a rancher who lost everything burned down the lies that tried to bury them both, stay with me until the end. And hey, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The church smelled like dust and old hymnals, and Nora Whitaker was trying very hard not to vomit. She stood at the altar in a borrowed dress that didn't fit right, the fabric pulling too tight across her shoulders and sagging everywhere else. The preacher droned through the ceremony with all the enthusiasm of a man reading a grocery list. Beside her, Silas Mercer didn't look at her once. Not that she blamed him. This wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction. Nora had been a widow for 8 months. Her husband, Thomas, sweet, useless Thomas, had died when his horse threw him into a ravine during a storm. No life insurance, no savings, just debts she couldn't pay, and a landlord who'd made it very clear what he expected in exchange for patience. So when the town council suggested she marry Silas Mercer, she'd said yes before they finished the sentence. It wasn't like she had a choice. Silas Mercer was a ghost story in Pine Bend. Once, he'd owned the largest ranch in 3 counties, ran 200 head of cattle, employed a dozen men. Then came the accident. Nobody talked about the details, but everyone knew he'd been found at the bottom of a canyon with his leg shattered and his spine damaged. His older brother Garrett had taken over the ranch temporarily while Silas recovered. That was 3 years ago. Now Silas was 35, half crippled, and living like a prisoner in his own house. The town pitied him. Garrett controlled everything, and Nora was being married off to him like a piece of furniture someone wanted out of storage. "Do you take this woman?" the preacher said. "Yes." Silas's voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "And do you—" "Yes," Nora said quickly. She wanted this over with. The preacher sighed and snapped his book shut. "Fine, you're married. Sign the papers. No kiss? No celebration. Just 2 signatures on a document that made Nora Whitaker into Nora Mercer and sealed her fate to a man she'd never spoken to before today." But the ride to the ranch was silent. Garrett Mercer drove the wagon, his big hands loose on the reins, a cigar clamped between his teeth. He was everything Silas wasn't: tall, broad-shouldered, healthy. Handsome in a way that felt dangerous. He smiled too much. "You'll like it out here, Mrs. Mercer," Garrett said, glancing back at her. "Quiet, peaceful, nothing to worry about." Nora didn't answer. She sat beside Silas on the narrow bench, acutely aware of the space between them. He held himself stiffly, one hand braced against the side of the wagon, his jaw tight. Every bump in the road made him flinch, though he tried to hide it. She wondered how much pain he was in. She wondered if he hated her for agreeing to this. The ranch appeared as the sun started to sink, a sprawling, beaten-down collection of buildings that might have been impressive once. The main house was 2 stories, painted white years ago, but now peeling and gray. The barn leaned slightly to one side. Fences sagged. Weeds choked the yard. It looked like a place that had given up. Garrett pulled the wagon to a stop and hopped down, stretching. "Home sweet home. I'll get your bag, ma'am." Silas climbed down carefully, gripping the side of the wagon, his bad leg dragging slightly. Nora waited, unsure if she should help or if that would humiliate him. Before she could decide, he was on the ground, breathing hard. "Go inside," he said quietly. "Second door on the left upstairs. That's your room." "Your room. Not our room." Nora nodded and grabbed her single bag before Garrett could touch it. Eek. The house was worse inside. The furniture was old and mismatched, the floors covered in dust, the walls marked with stains and cracks. It smelled like mildew and smoke. Nora climbed the stairs slowly, listening to the boards creak under her weight. The second door on the left opened into a small bedroom with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that overlooked the yard. The bedspread was faded but clean. Someone had tried, at least. She set her bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. This was her life now. A loveless marriage to a broken man in a dying house on the edge of nowhere. She should have been crying, but Nora Whitaker, Nora Mercer now, had run out of tears a long time ago. Demacha. Dinner was tense. Garrett cooked badly and served burned stew with bread that could have doubled as a weapon. He talked the entire time, filling the silence with stories about the ranch, about cattle prices, about weather patterns. Silas said nothing. He sat at the head of the table, eating slowly, his eyes down. Nora watched them both. Garrett was performing. Every word, every smile, every gesture was calculated. He was playing the role of the devoted brother, the responsible caretaker, the man holding everything together. But Silas looked like he was waiting for something. "So, Nora," Garrett said, pouring himself more coffee, "you ever work on a ranch before?" "No." "Well, don't worry. Not much for you to do anyway. Silas here can't manage the work anymore, and I've got it handled. You just keep the house nice, cook meals, that sort of thing. Easy enough, right?" She felt Silas tense beside her. "I can manage," she said carefully. Garrett laughed. "I'm sure you can. You seem like a capable woman. That's good. Silas needs someone capable." The way he said it made her skin crawl. After dinner, Garrett excused himself and disappeared into the office down the hall. Nora stood to clear the dishes, but Silas stopped her. "Leave them," he said quietly. "It's fine. I can... Leave them." His tone wasn't angry, just firm, final. Nora sat back down. They stayed there in silence for a long moment, listening to the sounds of Garrett moving around in the office, opening drawers, shuffling papers. "You should know something," Silas said finally, his voice so low she almost missed it. "This marriage isn't what you think it is." Nora frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked at her then, really looked at her for the first time. His eyes were dark, shadowed with exhaustion and something heavier, fear maybe, or rage. "You're not here to be my wife," he said. "You're here to be a witness." "A witness to what?" Silas's jaw tightened. "To what happens when Garrett finally decides he's tired of waiting for me to die." Nora didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Every creak made her jump. Every sound felt like a threat. "You're here to be a witness." What the hell did that mean? Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, uneven. Silas. She held her breath as he passed her door, heard him pause, then continue down the hall. A door closed softly. Nora waited 5 minutes, then slipped out of bed and into the hallway. The house was dark except for a faint glow coming from under Silas's door. She crept closer, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. She shouldn't do this, it was none of her business. But she was in this house now, she was part of this, whether she wanted to be or not. Nora pressed her ear to the door. At first she heard nothing. Then, a low, ragged sound. Breathing, harsh and strained. He was in pain. She almost knocked. Almost. Instead, she stepped back and returned to her room, her heart pounding. Silas Mercer wasn't the broken man everyone thought he was. He was something else. Something still fighting. And Nora was starting to realize she'd married into a war. The next morning, she found the first piece of evidence. She'd gone downstairs early, intending to make coffee and figure out the kitchen. The stove was ancient and temperamental, and she was struggling to get it lit when she noticed the office door was ajar. Garrett had locked it last night. She was sure of it. Nora glanced toward the stairs. No sound. The house was still. She pushed the door open. The office was a mess, papers everywhere, books stacked haphazardly, a desk covered in ledgers and contracts. She stepped inside carefully, her eyes scanning the room. On the desk, a ledger lay open. Nora moved closer and looked down. It was a record of ranch expenses. Feed, supplies, wages. But the numbers didn't make sense. Entries were crossed out, rewritten, smudged. Some pages had been torn out entirely. She flipped back a few pages and froze. There, a payment listed as Land Tax County Office for $300. And below it, in different handwriting, paid to G. Mercer, personal. Nora's stomach dropped. She turned more pages, found more, payments redirected, money moved, all of it ending up in Garrett's name. He was stealing from Silas. Looking for something? Nora spun around. Garrett stood in the doorway, still in his nightshirt, his arms crossed. His smile was gone. I was just snooping. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. That's rude, Mrs. Mercer. Didn't anyone teach you manners? Nora's heart hammered. The door was open. No, it wasn't. He moved closer. Nora backed up until she hit the desk. Let me give you some advice, Garrett said softly. This ranch is complicated. Silas isn't well. He gets confused, forgets things. I handle the business because he can't. If you start poking around, asking questions, causing trouble, well, that wouldn't be good for anyone. Understand? Nora forced herself to meet his eyes. I understand. Good. He reached past her and closed the ledger with a snap. Now go make breakfast and stay out of places you don't belong. Yes. She told Silas that afternoon. He was sitting on the porch, his bad leg propped up on a stool, staring out at the empty fields. Nora brought him water and sat down on the steps. I saw the ledgers, she said quietly. Silas didn't look at her. You shouldn't have done that. He's stealing from you. I know. Nora blinked. You know? Then why? Because I can't prove it. Silas's voice was flat. Every contract, every deed, every bank account. Garrett's name is on all of it now. He made sure of that after the accident. Legally, he owns this place. I'm just living here. That's not possible. This is your ranch. Was. Silas finally looked at her, and the exhaustion in his face made her chest ache. It was my ranch. Now it's his. And unless I can prove he forged those documents, unless I can show that he's been siphoning money and manipulating records for years, there's nothing I can do. Then we get proof. Silas laughed, a bitter, broken sound. With what? I can barely walk. I don't have money for a lawyer. The sheriff's in Garrett's pocket. Who's going to help me? I will. He stared at her. Why? Nora didn't have a good answer. She barely knew this man. She didn't owe him anything. But she thought about the way Garrett had looked at her in the office, the way he'd smiled when he threatened her, the way he thought she'd just roll over and accept it. Because I'm tired of powerful men deciding what happens to me, she said. Silas studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, he said. Then we need to be smart. Careful. Garrett can't know you're helping me. What do we do first? We find the original deeds. Garrett keeps them somewhere, probably locked up. If we can prove he forged my signature, we can take it to a judge in the next county, someone he doesn't control. Nora nodded. Where do we start? The safe, Silas said. In his bedroom. Breaking into Garrett's room was harder than it sounded. He left the house every afternoon to check the cattle and supervise the ranch hands. That gave them maybe 2 hours. But the door was locked, and Nora didn't know how to pick a lock. Window, Silas said. They were in the hallway outside Garrett's room, Silas leaning heavily on the wall, his face pale with effort. He'd insisted on coming upstairs, even though every step clearly hurt. The window, he repeated. In my room. It's right next to his. If you climb out onto the roof, you can get to his window from the outside. Nora stared at him. You want me to climb out on the roof? You got a better idea? She didn't. 10 minutes later, she was easing herself out of Silas's window, her heart in her throat, the ground looking very far away. The roof was sloped but not too steep. She inched along, gripping the shingles, trying not to look down. Garrett's window was closed but not locked. She pushed it open and climbed inside. The room was neat, too neat. The bed perfectly made, clothes folded, everything in its place. It felt staged, performative. Nora moved quickly, searching the dresser, the closet, under the bed. Nothing. Then she spotted it, a small iron safe built into the wall behind a framed photograph. She pulled the photograph down and stared at the safe's lock. No way she was getting into that without the combination. Unless... Nora turned and rifled through Garrett's desk. People always wrote down combinations somewhere. A notebook, a scrap of paper. There. Tucked inside a Bible on the nightstand, a slip of paper with 4 numbers, 8-14-21-7. She spun the dial, hand shaking, and heard the lock click. The safe swung open. Inside, stacks of cash, a pistol, and a leather folder. Nora grabbed the folder and opened it. Deeds, contracts, bank transfers. And there, Silas's signature on a document transferring ownership of the ranch to Garrett. Except the signature was wrong. The S was too rounded, the M too sharp. It wasn't even a good forgery. Nora's hands shook as she closed the folder. She had it. Proof. Behind her, the bedroom door creaked open. "Well, well," Garrett said softly. "Look at you. Boss." Nora spun around, the folder clutched to her chest. Garrett stood in the doorway, still wearing his riding coat, his hat in one hand. He looked more amused than angry. "Thought I'd be gone longer, didn't you?" He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "I saw Silas's window open. Figured I'd come check." Nora backed up toward the window. "Stay away from me." "Or what?" Garrett tilted his head. "You gonna scream? Go ahead. Nearest neighbor's 3 miles away." He was right. And Silas was downstairs, barely able to move. She was alone. Garrett crossed the room slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "You know what I think? I think you're a stupid, nosy woman who doesn't understand how things work out here. I think you've made a very bad mistake." Nora's back hit the wall. "He's your brother. He's weak." Garrett's voice turned cold. "He was weak before the accident, and he's useless now. This ranch would have died under him. I saved it. I built it back up, and I'm not letting some crippled fool and his charity case wife take it from me. The documents are forged. A judge will do exactly what I tell him to do," Garrett interrupted, "because I own half the county, sweetheart. You think anyone's going to side with Silas, the man who can't even stand without shaking? Against me?" He reached for the folder. Nora threw it. The folder hit him in the chest and exploded, papers flying everywhere. Garrett swore and lunged for her, but Nora was already moving. She ducked under his arm, grabbed the pistol from the safe, and ran. She didn't know how to use a gun. Didn't matter. She made it to the hallway, her breath coming in gasps, Garrett's footsteps pounding behind her. And then Silas was there. He stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the railing, his face twisted with effort and rage. In his hand, a shotgun. "Touch her," Silas said, his voice shaking but steady. "And I'll kill you." Garrett stopped. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "You won't," he said finally. "Try me." The brothers stared at each other. The air felt electric, dangerous. Then Garrett smiled. "Fine," he said softly. "Keep your little wife. Keep your useless papers. Won't matter. You're still a cripple, Silas, and cripples don't win." He turned and walked back into his room, slamming the door. Nora stood frozen, the pistol heavy in her hand. Silas lowered the shotgun slowly, his whole body trembling. Then his leg gave out, and he collapsed. Nora caught him before he hit the floor. They sat in Silas's room for a long time, not speaking. Nora had helped him to his bed, and he'd let her without protest. Now he lay propped against the headboard, his bad legs stretched out, his face gray with exhaustion. "That was stupid," he said finally. "Which part?" "All of it." He looked at her. "You could have gotten hurt." "So could you." Silas shook his head. "I'm already hurt. You're not. You should have stayed out of it." "Too late now." He almost smiled. "Yeah, too late." Nora pulled the chair closer to the bed. "What do we do now?" "I don't know." Silas closed his eyes. Garrett's right about one thing. The judges, the sheriff, most of them owe him favors. Even with the forged deeds, it's my word against his, and I'm... what? Not credible. His voice was bitter. "I spent 6 months after the accident so drugged up on laudanum I couldn't tell you my own name. Garrett made sure everyone saw that, made sure everyone knew I was unstable. If we go to court, he'll say I'm confused, delusional, and people will believe him." Nora's chest tightened. "So we can't win." "Not in court." "Then how?" Silas opened his eyes and looked at her. "We make him destroy himself." Over the next 2 weeks, Nora learned 3 things. First, Silas was a lot stronger than anyone knew. He worked every day, slow, painful work that left him shaking and gray-faced. But he worked. He could walk short distances without the cane if he focused. He could lift, carry, chop wood. Not much, not easily, but more than Garrett thought. He'd been hiding it. Second, Garrett was planning something. He started bringing men to the house, rough-looking ranch hands Nora didn't recognize, men who spoke in low voices and left quickly. She'd catch fragments of conversation through the walls. words like insurance and transfer and commitment papers. Silas explained Garrett was building a case to have him declared mentally incompetent. If he succeeded, he could put Silas in an asylum and take legal control of everything. Third, Nora was angrier than she'd ever been in her life. She'd spent years being quiet, being small, doing what she was told. She was done with that. Sacked. The plan started small. Nora began keeping a record. Every time Garrett left the house, every man who visited, every lie he told. She wrote it all down in a notebook she kept hidden under her mattress. She also started talking to people in town. It was risky. If Garrett found out, he'd know she was working against him. But Nora was careful. She'd go to the general store, the post office, the church, and she'd listen. She'd ask quiet questions. How's business at the Mercer Ranch? Garrett seems to be doing well for himself. Did Silas really sign over the ranch, or was that just a rumor? People talked, and Nora listened. She learned that Garrett owed money to half the merchants in town, that he'd been buying cattle on credit and selling them for cash, pocketing the difference, that he'd promised 3 different men partnerships in the ranch and delivered on none of them. He was overextended, desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday in October. Nora woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted out of bed and ran to the window. The barn was on fire, flames climbing the walls, black smoke pouring into the sky. She grabbed her robe and ran downstairs. Silas was already on the porch, leaning on the railing, staring at the flames. His face was blank, empty. Silas, he did it, Silas said quietly. Garrett did it. How do you know? Because I saw him. Silas pointed toward the tree line. He was standing right there, watching. Then he left. Nora's blood turned to ice. We have to get help. The sheriff won't do anything. Silas's voice was flat. Garrett will say it was an accident, faulty wiring, old wood. He'll file an insurance claim and pocket the money, and no one will question it. Then we make them question it. Silas looked at her. How? Nora thought fast. We don't put the fire out. What? We let it burn. We make sure everyone in town sees it. And when they ask what happened, we tell them the truth. That Garrett said it. That he's been stealing, lying, destroying this ranch piece by piece. We make it public. We make it loud. So loud he can't cover it up. Silas stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Then slowly he nodded. All right, he said. Let's burn it down. Cutes. By dawn, half the town had gathered at the Mercer Ranch. The barn was gone. Just a smoking skeleton of charred beams and ash. Nora and Silas stood in the yard, wrapped in blankets, looking appropriately devastated. The sheriff arrived around 7, a fat man named Doyle, who clearly didn't want to be there. Terrible shame, he said, shaking his head. Old buildings like that, they go up fast. It wasn't the building, Nora said clearly. It was arson. Doyle blinked. Now, ma'am, that's a serious accusation. My husband saw Garrett Mercer standing in the trees watching the fire. He said it. A murmur ran through the crowd. People turned to look at Garrett, who stood off to the side, his face carefully neutral. That's ridiculous, Garrett said smoothly. I was asleep in the house. He's not well, Sheriff. He gets confused, sees things. I'm not confused, Silas said. His voice was steady, strong. I know what I saw. And I know you've been stealing from this ranch for 3 years, forging documents, manipulating accounts. You want me gone, Garrett. You want me dead or locked up so you can take everything. The crowd went silent. Garrett's smile slipped. Silas, you're not making sense. Show them the deeds, Silas said, looking at Nora. She pulled the folder from under her coat and held it up. Forged signatures, falsified transfers, all of it in Garrett's handwriting. Doyle looked uncomfortable. Now, this is a family matter. It's fraud, Nora said sharply. And you're going to investigate it, Sheriff, unless you want everyone here to know you're protecting a thief. Doyle flushed red. Garrett stepped forward, his hands raised. All right, let's all calm down. Silas, Nora, I understand you're upset. The fire, the stress, it's a lot. But accusing me of, did you or did you not forge my signature on the ranch transfer? Silas asked. Garrett's jaw tightened. I was protecting you. You were in no state to manage. Yes or no? It's not that simple a yes or no. The silence stretched. Garrett looked around at the crowd, at the neighbors, the merchants, the ranch hands, at the sheriff, and then he smiled. Fine, he said softly. You want the truth? Yes. I forged the papers. I took the money. I did all of it. Because you were pathetic, Silas. You were weak and broken and useless, and someone had to save this place. I saved it. I built it back up. And I'm not apologizing for that. The crowd erupted. Doyle stepped forward, hand on his gun. Garrett Mercer, you're under arrest for fraud, and Garrett pulled a pistol from his coat. Someone screamed. Nobody's arresting anyone, Garrett said, his voice shaking. This is my ranch. Mine. I earned it. I bled for it, and I'm not letting you take it from me. He pointed the gun at Silas. Nora stepped in front of her husband. Move, Garrett said. No. Move or I'll shoot through you. Nora's heart hammered. Her hand shook, but she didn't move. Behind her, Silas gripped her shoulder. Nora, he said quietly. It's all right. No, it's all right. He stepped around her, moving slowly, his bad leg dragging. He stood between Garrett and the crowd, facing his brother. You want to shoot me, Silas said. Go ahead. But you do it in front of all these people. You do it where everyone can see what you really are. Garrett's hand trembled. You were my brother, Silas said, his voice breaking. I trusted you, I loved you, and you tried to destroy me. You destroyed yourself, Garrett spat. You were always weak, always second best. I just finished what you started. Maybe, Silas said, but I'm still here, and you're done. For a moment, Nora thought Garrett would pull the trigger. Then he lowered the gun. And he ran. He bolted toward the tree line, shoving past the crowd. The sheriff shouted, but Garrett was fast. He made it to the trees and disappeared. They found his horse gone an hour later. Garrett Mercer had fled. The aftermath was messy. The sheriff opened an investigation. The forged documents were sent to a judge in the next county. Merchants came forward with stories of unpaid debts and broken promises. The insurance company started asking questions about the fire. It took weeks, but slowly, piece by piece, the truth came out. Garrett had been embezzling for years. He'd burned the barn to cover up missing cattle. He'd planned to have Silas committed and sell the ranch out from under him. And he'd almost gotten away with it. Honk. 2 months later, word came that Garrett had been arrested in Colorado for trying to forge land deeds under a false name. He'd be extradited back to stand trial. Silas took the news quietly. Nora found him on the porch that evening, staring out at the empty fields. She sat beside him, pulling her shawl tighter against the cold. You all right? She asked. I don't know, Silas said. He's my brother. I should feel something, but I don't. Maybe that's okay. He looked at her. You saved my life, you know, that day. If you hadn't stepped in front of me, you would have done the same. Maybe. He smiled faintly. Or maybe I would have just shot him myself. Nora laughed, startled and genuine. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the broken ranch. What happens now? Nora asked. We rebuild, Silas said. If you want to. If I want to. He turned to face her. This marriage, it was a business arrangement. You didn't sign up for all this. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. I'll make sure you're taken care of. I'm not leaving. Silas blinked. You're not? No. Nora met his eyes. I'm staying. We're fixing this place. Together. Why? She thought about it. About the last 2 months, about the fear, the danger, the impossible odds. About the man sitting beside her who'd been broken and beaten and had still found the strength to stand up. Because for the first time in my life, she said, I'm exactly where I want to be. Silas stared at her. Then slowly, he reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady, real. All right then, he said quietly. Let's get to work. And for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, Nora felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Winter came early that year, and with it, the reality of what they'd taken on. The ranch wasn't just broken. It was bleeding money they didn't have, falling apart faster than 2 people could fix it, and every day brought a new crisis that made Nora wonder if hope was just another word for delusion. The first week after Garrett fled, she'd been optimistic. They had the truth on their side. They had each other. They'd survive. By the second week, the bank had sent a letter. Silas read it at the kitchen table, his face going pale. Then he set it down and pushed it toward her without a word. Nora picked it up. The words swam in front of her eyes. 3 months of unpaid mortgage. $6,000 in outstanding loans. Immediate payment required or the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings. 6,000, she said numbly. Garrett took everything liquid, Silas said, every cent in the accounts. He was planning to let the ranch go under and buy it back at auction for pennies. Can we fight it? With what? He gestured around the kitchen. We don't have money for a lawyer. Hell, we barely have money for food. Nora set the letter down. Her hands were shaking. How long do we have? 60 days. Maybe 90 if we're lucky. 3 months to save a ranch that was worth more dead than alive. 3 months to survive winter on a property that was already falling apart. Nora looked at Silas. He looked back at her. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Silas stood up, gripping the table for balance. All right, he said. We need to make a list. A list of what? Everything that's broken. Everything we can fix. Everything we can sell. He limped to the counter and grabbed a pencil and paper. We can't save all of it, but maybe we can save enough. Nora joined him, and together they started writing. By the time they finished, the list covered 3 pages. It was overwhelming, impossible, but it was something. The next morning, they started working. Silas took inventory of the cattle that were left. Garrett had sold off most of the herd, but there were still 30 head scattered across the property. If they could round them up, fatten them through winter, and sell them in spring, that might cover part of the debt. Nora tackled the house. The roof leaked in 4 places. The stove barely worked. Half the windows were cracked. She couldn't fix all of it, but she could patch, improvise, make do. It was exhausting, frustrating. Some days she wanted to scream. But she didn't stop. One afternoon, she was on the roof trying to nail down loose shingles when she heard a horse approach. She looked down and saw a man she didn't recognize, older, weathered, with a gray beard and a worn hat. He tipped his hat. Mrs. Mercer? Yes? Name's Coleman. I own the ranch 2 miles south. Heard about what happened with Garrett. Nora climbed down carefully, hammer still in hand. If you're here to collect a debt, I'm here to help. She blinked. What? Coleman shifted in his saddle. Garrett screwed me over too, bought 20 head of cattle on credit, never paid. I figured the money was gone, but then I heard you and Silas were trying to make things right, and I thought. He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Look, I know what it's like to lose everything. If you need a hand getting this place back on its feet, I'm willing to pitch in, no charge. Nora stared at him. Why would you do that? Because your husband stood up to Garrett in front of the whole town, Coleman said simply. That took guts. And because I'm tired of watching good people get crushed by bastards like him. Before Nora could respond, another voice called out, Coleman, you old fool, I told you to wait for me. A woman rode up behind him, 50s, sharp-eyed, sitting her horse like she'd been born in the saddle. She looked Nora up and down and nodded approvingly. I'm Margaret Hayes, she said. I run the boarding house in town. Garrett owed me 4 months' rent for his ranch hands. I figure he's not paying it, so I'll take it out and trade. You need help. I've got 2 strong sons who can work. Deal? Nora didn't know what to say. She looked toward the barn, where Silas was struggling to repair a fence. He'd stopped working and was watching them, his expression unreadable. I need to ask my husband. Already did, Margaret said. He said to ask you. Nora looked back at Silas. He gave her a small nod. She turned to Coleman and Margaret. All right, thank you. Don't thank us yet, Coleman said. This place is a disaster. We've got our work cut out for us. He wasn't wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, more people showed up. A blacksmith who'd been cheated by Garrett came to repair tools. A widow brought food and stayed to help Nora patch the roof. 3 ranch hands who'd worked for Silas before the accident showed up one morning and started rounding up cattle without being asked. It wasn't charity. Everyone wanted something, payment in labor, a share of future profits, a chance to settle old scores with Garrett. But it was help, real help. And slowly, impossibly, the ranch started to come back to life. Nora worked until her hands bled and her back screamed. She learned to swing a hammer, mend a fence, butcher a chicken. She learned which boards in the porch were rotten and which could hold weight. She learned to start the stove with damp wood and cook meals for a dozen people with almost nothing. She learned that survival wasn't pretty. It was ugly and hard and it hurt. But she was good at it. One night, she found Silas in the barn, sitting on an overturned crate, staring at his bad leg. "You all right?" she asked. "I can't do this," he said quietly. Nora sat down beside him. "Can't do what?" "Any of it. I watch you up on that roof, lifting beams, working yourself to the bone, and I can't even walk across the yard without my leg giving out." His voice cracked. "You shouldn't have to do this. I should be the one—" "Stop." He looked at her. "You think I care that you can't climb a ladder?" Nora said. "You stood up to Garrett with a gun pointed at you. You've been fighting this fight for 3 years, alone, with everyone telling you to give up. Don't you dare tell me you're not doing enough. I'm supposed to protect you. You do protect me. Every day." She reached out and took his hand. "But I don't need you to be some perfect hero, Silas. I just need you to be here. With me. That's enough." His throat worked. He didn't say anything, but his grip on her hand tightened. They sat there in the cold barn, surrounded by broken tools and patched walls, and Nora realized something. This wasn't just about saving the ranch anymore. It was about saving each other. But saving anything required money, and money was the one thing they didn't have. The bank sent another letter, then another, each one more urgent than the last. Nora started selling everything she could. Furniture they didn't need, old tools, her wedding ring from Thomas. It wasn't enough. One morning, she was going through the office, still a mess despite her attempts to organize it, when she found a lockbox shoved in the back of a cabinet. It was small, iron, and locked. She brought it to Silas. "You know what this is?" she asked. He frowned. "I've never seen it before." It was in the office, hidden behind some books. Silas took it, turning it over in his hands. "Garrett's. Has to be." They tried to open it. No luck. The lock was solid, and neither of them knew how to pick it. "We could break it," Nora said. "If there's nothing inside, we've destroyed evidence. And if there's something important inside." Silas hesitated. Then he grabbed a hammer. It took 10 minutes of prying and smashing, but finally the lock gave way. The box popped open. Inside, a stack of papers and a small leather journal. Nora pulled out the journal and opened it. The first page was dated 3 years ago, Garrett's handwriting. She started reading. Her blood went cold. "Silas," she said slowly, "you need to see this." The journal was a record, a meticulous, damning record of everything Garrett had done. Forged signatures, falsified contracts, bribes paid to the sheriff, the bank manager, the county clerk. Names, dates, amounts. And at the back, a list of properties Garrett had planned to acquire once he had full control of the ranch. He documented his own crimes. "Why would he keep this?" Nora whispered. "Insurance," Silas said, his voice tight. "If anyone turned on him, he could take them down with him. He never thought we'd find it." Nora flipped through the pages, her hands shaking. "This is enough. This proves everything. We can take this to the judge and what?" Silas took the journal from her. "Garrett's already on the run. Even if we expose everyone he bribed, it doesn't get us the money we need to save the ranch. Then what do we do with it?" Silas stared at the journal for a long moment. Then he smiled, sharp and bitter. "We use it as leverage," he said. The next day, Silas sent a telegram to the bank manager. It was short, direct. "We have Garrett's records. Meet with us, or we go to the federal marshal." The bank manager arrived 2 days later. His name was Franklin Howell, a thin man with oiled hair and a nervous habit of adjusting his collar. He sat across from Silas and Nora in the kitchen, sweating despite the cold. "This is blackmail," he said. "No," Silas said calmly. "This is a negotiation. You accepted bribes from Garrett to approve fraudulent loans and falsify records. That's a federal crime. We have proof. Unless you want to explain to a marshal why Garrett was paying you $300 a month, you're going to help us." Howell's face went pale. "What do you want?" "The mortgage," Nora said. "We want it restructured. Lower payments, extended timeline, Something we can actually afford. I can't just... Yes, you can, Silas interrupted. You're the bank manager. You have that authority. Use it. Howell looked between them, his hands shaking. If I do this, and the board finds out, the board won't find out as long as you cooperate. And if I don't? Silas slid the journal across the table. Then you're going to prison. Your choice. Howell stared at the journal like it was a snake. Then he nodded. Fine, he whispered. I'll restructure the loan. The new mortgage terms arrived a week later. Payments cut in half. Timeline extended to 10 years. It wasn't perfect, but it was survivable. Nora read the papers 3 times, hardly believing it. We did it, she said. Silas leaned back in his chair, exhausted. We bought time, that's all. That's everything. He looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. But the reprieve didn't last long. 2 days later, a lawyer showed up at the ranch. He was young, well-dressed, and carried a leather briefcase like a weapon. He introduced himself as Robert Dannon, representing the estate of Garrett Mercer. Estate? Nora repeated. Garrett's not dead. No, Dannon said smoothly, but he's been declared a fugitive, which means his assets are being frozen pending trial, including his share of this ranch. Silas stood up slowly. His share? This ranch is mine. According to the deed filed with the county, Garrett Mercer owns 60% of this property. That makes you a minority stakeholder, Mr. Mercer. And as his legal representative, I'm here to inform you that the estate is exercising its right to force a sale. Nora's stomach dropped. You can't do that. Actually, I can. The estate has debts to settle. If the property is sold, those debts are paid first, and whatever's left is split between the stakeholders. Dannon smiled. Of course, if you'd like to buy out the estate's share, we're open to negotiations. I believe the current valuation is around $18,000. $18,000. They didn't have $1,800. This is garbage, Silas said, his voice shaking. Garrett stole this ranch. Those deeds are forged. You know that. That's a matter for the courts to decide, Dannon said. In the meantime, the sale will proceed. You have 30 days to vacate. He set a stack of papers on the table and walked out. Nora stared at the papers, her mind racing. They'd survived Garrett. They'd survived the bank. They'd clawed their way back from nothing. And now this. We're going to lose it, Silas said quietly. Aren't we? Nora didn't answer, because she didn't have one. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Her mind kept turning over the same problem, looking for a solution that didn't exist. They needed money. A lot of it. Fast. But where? Around midnight, she gave up and went downstairs. She found Silas in the office, surrounded by papers, his face haggard. You should be sleeping, she said. Can't. Nora sat down across from him. We'll figure something out. No, we won't. He pushed the papers away. I've gone through everything. There's nothing left to sell. No one left to borrow from. We're done. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. He looked at her, and the defeat in his eyes made her chest ache. I'm sorry, Nora. You gave up everything to help me, and I couldn't even keep the damn ranch. This isn't your fault. It is. All of it. If I'd been smarter, stronger, if I'd seen what Garrett was doing sooner... Stop. Nora reached across the desk and grabbed his hand. Garrett did this, not you, and we're not done yet. What else is there? She didn't know, but she refused to give up. There has to be something, she said. Some piece we're missing. Some way to fight this. Silas shook his head. There isn't. But Nora kept thinking. Garrett's journal, the bribes, the names. And then it hit her. The sheriff, she said suddenly. Silas frowned. What about him? Garrett was paying him. It's in the journal. 3 years of payments. Nora stood up, pacing. If we expose that, Doyle loses his job. Maybe worse. He's not going to let that happen. So? So we make him help us. Nora, he's not going to... He will if the alternative is prison. She grabbed the journal from the shelf. We go to him. We show him the proof. And we tell him that if he wants to keep his badge, he's going to find a way to delay this sale until we can prove the deeds are fake. Silas stared at her. That's insane. You have a better idea? He didn't. The next morning, they rode into town. Sheriff Doyle was in his office, feet up on his desk, reading a newspaper. He looked up when they walked in and sighed. What now? Nora dropped the journal on his desk. Read it. Doyle picked it up, frowning. His expression changed as he read. The color drained from his face. Where did you get this? He asked quietly. Garrett's office, Silas said. It's all there, every bribe, every payoff, including the ones to you. Doyle closed the journal carefully. What do you want? The estate is trying to force a sale of the ranch, Nora said. We need time to prove Garrett's deeds are forged. You're going to help us get that time. How? You're the sheriff. Figure it out. Delay the sale. Pressure the lawyer. I don't care how you do it. She leaned forward. But if you don't, this journal goes to the federal marshal, and you lose everything. Doyle's jaw tightened. That's blackmail. Yes, Nora said. It is. For a long moment, Doyle said nothing. Then he stood up, grabbed his hat, and walked out. Nora and Silas exchanged a glance. Think he'll do it? Silas asked. He doesn't have a choice. They waited. 3 days later, the lawyer, Dannon, showed up at the ranch again. This time, he looked furious. What did you do? He demanded. What are you talking about? Nora asked innocently. The sale's been delayed. The sheriff filed a motion claiming there are irregularities in the property records. The judge granted a 60-day extension for review. Dannon's eyes narrowed. That was you. Sounds like the legal system working as intended, Silas said. Dannon stepped closer. You're playing a dangerous game. The estate has resources you can't imagine, connections, money. You delay this sale and we'll bury you. Get off my property, Silas said quietly. Dannon glared at him. Then he turned and left. Nora watched him go, her heart pounding. 60 days, she said. That's all we bought. Then we'd better make them count. The next 2 months were brutal. They worked every angle they could think of. Silas reached out to lawyers in other counties trying to find someone willing to challenge the forged deeds. Nora went through every document in the office, building a case piece by piece. Meanwhile, the ranch continued to fall apart. The roof started leaking again. 2 more cattle died. One of the fences collapsed in a storm, and they lost 3 days rounding up strays. Nora was so tired she could barely think. Her hands were covered in cuts and calluses. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. But she didn't stop. One night, she was in the kitchen trying to make soup from scraps when Silas came in. He looked worse than she felt, his face gray, his leg dragging more than usual. He sat down heavily at the table. I talked to a lawyer in Cedar Falls, he said. He'll take the case, but he wants $500 up front. Nora stirred the soup. We don't have $500. I know. She set the spoon down. Then what do we do? Silas didn't answer. Nora sat down across from him. They'd been married for 4 months, and she felt like she'd lived a lifetime. This man across from her, stubborn, broken, relentless, had become the only constant in her world. She didn't know when it had happened, when he'd stopped being a stranger and started being hers, but somewhere along the way, he had. We'll find the money, she said. How? I don't know, but we will. Silas looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, softened. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly. What do you mean? This. All of this. You could have left, gone back to town, started over, but you stayed. Why? Nora thought about it. About the woman she'd been 4 months ago. Quiet, scared, invisible. She wasn't that woman anymore. Because I'm not running anymore, she said. From anyone. Or anything. Silas reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, real. We're going to lose the ranch, he said. You know that, right? Maybe. Probably. Nora squeezed his hand. Then we lose it fighting. And for the first time in weeks, Silas smiled. The 60 days ran out on a Tuesday. The lawyer, Dannon, showed up with the sheriff and a judge from the county seat. They had the paperwork. The authority, the law on their side. Nora and Silas stood on the porch and watched them approach. This is it, Silas said quietly. Nora nodded. She thought about everything they'd done, everything they'd survived. It wasn't enough. But it was something. Dannon climbed the porch steps, holding the eviction notice. Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer, I'm sorry it's come to this, but the law is clear. You have 24 hours to vacate the property. Like hell, a voice called out. Everyone turned. Coleman rode into the yard, followed by Margaret Hayes, and behind them, a dozen more. Neighbors, ranch hands, townspeople. They formed a line between the porch and the lawyer. This ranch belongs to Silas Mercer, Coleman said. We're not letting you take it. Dannon's face flushed. This is a legal proceeding. You're interfering. We're witnessing, Margaret interrupted. Big difference. The judge stepped forward, a tired-looking man named Carver. Folks, I understand your loyalty, but the law says those deeds are valid, Silas said, his voice carrying across the yard. But they're not. Garrett Mercer forged my signature, stole my land, and this sale is based on fraud. That's a serious accusation, Carver said, and I can prove it. Silas pulled out a folder. Original contracts, signed before the accident. My real signature. Compare them to the ones Garrett filed. You'll see they don't match. He handed the folder to the judge. Carver opened it slowly, studied the papers. His expression changed. He looked up at Dannon. These signatures don't match. That's irrelevant, Dannon said quickly. The deed was filed legally. Based on a forgery, Carver said sharply, which makes it void. The yard went silent. Dannon's face turned red. Your Honor, I must object. Object all you want. I'm issuing a stay on this sale pending a full investigation into the property records. Carver handed the papers back to Silas. You've got your extension, Mr. Mercer. Use it wisely. He turned and walked back to his carriage. Dannon stared after him, furious. Then he looked at Silas. This isn't over, he said. Yeah, Silas said. It is. Dannon left, the sheriff left, and the crowd in the yard erupted in cheers. Nora stood on the porch, hardly able to breathe. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Coleman rode up to the porch, grinning. Thought you could use some backup. How did you know? Nora asked. Margaret heard the lawyer was coming. We figured you'd need witnesses. He tipped his hat. Told you we'd help. Nora couldn't speak. She just nodded. As the crowd dispersed, she turned to Silas. He was leaning against the porch railing, his face pale, his whole body shaking. You all right? She asked. No, he said. But we won, so I will be. Nora moved closer. Without thinking, she put her arms around him. Silas stiffened. Then slowly, he hugged her back. They stood there on the broken porch of the broken ranch, holding each other, and Nora realized something. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about survival. It had become about something bigger, something worth fighting for. The victory lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, Nora woke to the sound of breaking glass. She bolted upright, heart hammering, and grabbed the shotgun she now kept beside the bed. Down the hall, she heard Silas moving, his uneven footsteps quick despite the limp. They met at the top of the stairs. Stay here, he said. Not a chance. They went down together, Silas gripping the railing, Nora with the shotgun raised. The front door was still locked, the windows intact. The sound had come from the back of the house. They moved through the kitchen and stopped. The back door hung open, cold air pouring in. On the floor, scattered among shards of broken glass, was a brick. Tied to it with twine was a note. Silas picked it up. His face went hard. What does it say? Nora asked. He handed it to her. The handwriting was crude, blocky. You don't belong here. Leave or burn. Nora's hands shook. Who would? Could be anyone. Silas's voice was flat. Garrett had friends. People who owe him. People who don't like that we won. We need to tell the sheriff. Doyle won't do anything. You know that. He was right. The sheriff had helped them once out of self-preservation, but he wouldn't stick his neck out again. They were on their own. Nora looked at the broken glass, the threatening note, and felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't over. It was never going to be over. The attacks started small. Fences cut overnight, cattle scattered, a water trough poisoned, killing 2 calves. Then they got worse. Someone set fire to the hay storage. They caught it early, managed to put it out before it spread, but half their winter feed went up in smoke. A week later, someone shot out the windows of the barn. Silas started sleeping with his rifle. Nora kept the shotgun loaded at all times. They took turns standing watch at night, exhausted and jumpy, waiting for the next attack. It was like living under siege. "We can't keep doing this," Nora said one morning. She was sitting at the kitchen table trying to drink coffee, her hands trembling from exhaustion. "We're going to collapse." Silas stood by the window watching the yard. His bad leg was worse lately, the stress, the lack of sleep, the constant strain. He could barely make it across a room without leaning on something. "I know," he said quietly. "Then what do we do?" He didn't answer, because there was no good answer. They could leave, abandon the ranch, start over somewhere else. But Nora knew Silas would never do that. This land was all he had left. Giving it up would kill him slower than any fire. And she wasn't leaving either. She'd meant what she said. She was done running. "We find out who's doing this," she said finally. "And we stop them." Silas turned to look at her. "How?" "We set a trap." It took 3 days to set up. Silas spread the word in town that they were moving a large shipment of cattle to the south pasture on Friday night. Valuable stock. Easy targets. It was a lie. They didn't have valuable stock. Didn't have a south pasture worth mentioning. But whoever was attacking them didn't know that. Friday night they waited. Silas was hidden in the barn, rifle across his knees. Nora was in the house, watching from the upstairs window, shotgun ready. The moon was a sliver, the night dark and cold. Hours passed. Nothing. Nora was starting to think they'd guessed wrong when she saw movement near the tree line. 3 men on horseback, moving slowly, trying to stay quiet. Her heart kicked into a gallop. She whistled, low and sharp, the signal they'd agreed on. In the barn, Silas moved. The men reached the corral and dismounted. One of them pulled something from his saddlebag, a torch. Nora didn't wait. She raised the shotgun, aimed high, and fired. The blast shattered the night. The men scattered, shouting. One dove behind the fence. Another ran for his horse. The third pulled a gun. "Drop it!" Silas's voice came from the barn. He stepped into the open, rifle raised. "Now!" The man hesitated. Then he fired. The shot went wide. Silas returned fire and the man went down screaming, clutching his leg. The other 2 bolted. Horses pounded away into the darkness. Nora ran downstairs and out into the yard. Silas was standing over the wounded man, rifle aimed at his chest. "Don't move," Silas said. The man was young, maybe 25, with a scraggly beard and wild eyes. Blood soaked his pants leg. He looked terrified. "Who sent you?" Silas demanded. I can't. "Who sent you?" The man's face crumpled. "It was Dannon, the lawyer. He paid us, said you didn't deserve the ranch, said if we made enough trouble you'd leave and he could buy it cheap." Nora felt her stomach drop. "Dannon?" "He's working with some land company. They want the property. They've been buying up ranches all over the county." Silas's jaw tightened. "How many of you?" "Just us 3. I swear. Please, I need a doctor." "You need a cell," Silas said. "Nora, get the wagon." They drove the man to town and dumped him at the sheriff's office with a full confession. Doyle looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole. "I'll bring Dannon in for questioning," he said reluctantly. "You do that," Silas said, "and if he walks, we're going to the federal marshal. Understand?" Doyle nodded. On the ride back to the ranch, Nora and Silas sat in silence. The sky was starting to lighten in the east. Dawn coming. "You think it's over?" Nora asked. "No," Silas said. "But maybe we bought some breathing room." That was enough. For now. 2 days later, Robert Dannon left town. No arrest. No charges. Just gone. The sheriff claimed there wasn't enough evidence, that the wounded man's confession was coerced, that Dannon had an alibi. It was garbage, and everyone knew it. But Dannon was gone, and the attack stopped. Nora didn't trust it. She kept the shotgun close, kept watching the tree line, kept waiting for the next blow. It didn't come. Instead, something else happened. Spring arrived. It came slowly, grudgingly, the way spring always did in that hard country. The snow melted. The ground thawed. Green started creeping back into the world. And the ranch, battered and scarred and half dead, started to wake up. Silas managed to round up the remaining cattle and get them to pasture. It wasn't much of a herd, 23 head, most of them scraggly and underfed, but it was something. Nora planted a garden. She didn't know what she was doing, just followed the advice of the women in town and hoped for half the seeds didn't take. But half did, and by late April they had lettuce and carrots and the start of tomatoes. It wasn't prosperity, it was survival. But survival felt like a victory. One evening, Nora was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard a horse approach. She looked up and saw Coleman riding into the yard, leading a second horse. He tipped his hat. "Evening, Mrs. Mercer." "Coleman?" She stood, brushing dirt off her hands. "What brings you out?" "Got something for you." He gestured to the second horse, a sturdy bay mare with kind eyes. "Her name's Clover. She's getting old, not much use for ranch work anymore, but she's gentle. Thought you might like her." Nora blinked. "I can't. We can't afford—" "She's a gift," Coleman said. "Considerate payment for standing up to Garrett. That took guts. Figured you earned a horse." Before Nora could respond, Silas came out onto the porch. "Coleman," he said, nodding. "Silas. I was just telling your wife here. Clover's hers if she wants her." Silas looked at Nora. "You want a horse?" Nora looked at the mare. She'd never owned a horse before. Never thought she would. But standing there in the garden she'd planted on the ranch she'd fought for, it felt right. "Yes," she said. "Thank you, Coleman." The old rancher grinned. "She's all yours. Treat her well." After he left, Nora led Clover to the barn. Silas followed, moving slowly, his cane tapping against the ground. "You know how to ride?" he asked. "Not really." "I'll teach you." Nora looked at him. His face was still gaunt, still lined with pain, but there was something different in his eyes now, something lighter. "You think we're going to make it?" she asked quietly. Silas was silent for a moment. Then he reached out and ran his hand along Clover's neck. "I think we've made it this far, he said. "That's more than I expected 6 months ago." It wasn't a promise, but it was honest. And honesty was something Nora had learned to value. The garden grew. The cattle fattened. The ranch began, slowly and painfully, to stabilize. But the money was still a problem. They delayed the foreclosure, fought off the forced sale, survived the attacks. But the debt remained, and debts didn't forgive themselves. One afternoon, Nora was going through the ledgers, trying to figure out how to make $3 stretch to cover $30 worth of supplies, when she found something odd, a deed, tucked between 2 pages, nearly overlooked. It was for a piece of land on the eastern edge of the property, 20 acres. And according to the document, it had been sold separately from the main ranch, to Garrett. Except the signature was Silas's, and this one looked real. Nora frowned and went to find him. He was in the barn trying to fix a broken harness. She handed him the deed. "You know about this?" she asked. Silas studied it. His face went pale. "I forgot about this," he said quietly. "Forgot?" "It was right before the accident. Garrett said he wanted to buy a piece of the land to build his own place. I sold it to him for $1, family discount." He laughed bitterly. "I was trying to help him. Is it still his?" "Should be. But if he never registered the transfer—" Silas trailed off, his eyes widening. "If he never registered it, it's still mine." Nora's heart started to race. "How much is 20 acres worth?" "Depends on the land. If it's good grazing, maybe $1,000. If there's water—" He looked at her. "We need to check the county records." They rode to town the next morning. The county clerk's office was a cramped room that smelled like dust and old paper. The clerk, a wizened man named Hutchins, looked annoyed at the interruption. "We need to check a land transfer," Silas said. "From 5 years ago." Hutchins sighed and pulled out a massive ledger. "Name?" "Mercer, Silas and Garrett." Hutchins flipped through pages, running his finger down columns of cramped handwriting. Finally, he stopped. "Here. Transfer of 20 acres, eastern boundary, signed by Silas Mercer, but," he squinted, "no counter-signature from Garrett, no payment recorded, no finalization." "What does that mean?" Nora asked. "Means the sale never went through. Legally, the land's still yours." Hutchins looked up at Silas. "You want to finalize it now, or—" "No," Silas said quickly. "Leave it as is." They walked out into the sunlight, and Nora grabbed Silas's arm. "That's our land," she said. "We can sell it." "Maybe. Need to survey it first, see what's actually there." They rode out that afternoon. The eastern boundary was rough country, rocky hills, scattered trees, a creek running through the low ground. It wasn't prime grazing land, but it was something. They were walking the creek bed when Nora spotted something odd, a dark seam in the rock face, half hidden by brush. "Silas," she called, "look at this." He limped over. Nora pulled back the brush, revealing a narrow opening. A cave? A mine? Silas crouched down, wincing, and peered inside. "There's something in there," he said. "What?" He reached in and pulled out a rock. It was dark, heavy, streaked with something that glinted in the sunlight. Nora's breath caught. "Is that—" "Might be." Silas turned the rock over in his hands. "Could be ore. Silver, maybe. Or just fool's gold." "How do we find out?" "We take it to an assayer." They rode back to town with the rock wrapped in Silas's coat, trying not to get their hopes up. The assayer's office was next to the blacksmith. The assayer, a nervous man named Porter, took the rock and disappeared into his back room. Nora and Silas waited and waited. Finally, Porter came back out. His hands were shaking. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "On my land," Silas said carefully. "Why?" Porter set the rock down. "Because this is high-grade silver ore. If there's a vein where you found this, you're sitting on a fortune." Nora's knees went weak. "How much of a fortune?" "Depends on the size of the deposit. But even a small vein could be worth $10,000, $20,000. Maybe more." Silas looked at Nora. Nora looked at Silas. They'd found it. They'd actually found it. The solution to everything. But before either of them could speak, the door opened, and Garrett Mercer walked in. For a moment, nobody moved. Garrett looked different, thinner, harder. His clothes were worn, his face unshaven, but his eyes were the same, cold and calculating. "Well," he said softly, "isn't this interesting?" Silas stepped in front of Nora, his hand moving to his belt. No gun. He'd left it at home. "You're supposed to be in custody," Silas said. "Escaped 3 weeks ago. Figured I'd come back and settle some unfinished business." Garrett's eyes moved to the rock on the counter. "Silver, huh? On the eastern boundary? That's my land, little brother." "No, it's not. The transfer was never finalized." "Doesn't matter. We had an agreement. That land's mine." "The law says different," Garrett smiled. "The law?" "Right. Because the law's been so helpful to you." He pulled a gun from his coat. Porter yelped and dove behind the counter. Nora grabbed Silas's arm, her heart hammering. "Here's what's going to happen," Garrett said calmly. "You're going to sign over that land to me. Right here, right now. And then you're going to forget you ever found that silver." "Or what?" Silas asked. His voice was steady, but Nora could feel him shaking. "Or I shoot you both and take it anyway." "You won't." "I killed our father, Silas. You think I won't kill you?" The world tilted. Nora stared at Garrett. "What?" "The old man wouldn't sign over his share of the ranch," Garrett said, still smiling. "So I helped him have an accident, same way I helped Silas have his accident. Only Silas survived. Disappointing, really." Silas's face had gone white. You pushed me into that canyon. You were in my way. I was your brother. You were weak." Garrett cocked the gun. "Now sign the paper or—" The door burst open. Sheriff Doyle stood there, gun drawn, 2 deputies behind him. "Drop it, Garrett," Doyle said. Garrett laughed. "You're joking." "I'm not. There's a federal warrant for your arrest. Fraud, theft, escape from custody, and now I'm adding murder to the list. Drop the gun." For a long moment, Garrett didn't move. Then he swung the gun toward Silas. Doyle fired. The shot was deafening in the small room. Garrett staggered back, the gun falling from his hand. He looked down at the blood spreading across his chest, his expression almost surprised. Then he collapsed. Nora couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Silas moved to his brother's side, dropping to his knees despite the pain it caused. Garrett was still alive, his breath coming in wet gasps. "Why?" Silas asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you do this?" Garrett coughed, blood on his lips. Because you got everything. The ranch, the name, father's respect, and I got nothing. That's not true. It is. Garrett's eyes were fading. I just wanted what was mine. It was never yours. Garrett smiled faintly. Then his eyes went empty. Silas sat back, staring at his brother's body. Nora knelt beside him, putting her hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered. Silas shook his head. Don't be. He made his choices. But his voice was hollow. And Nora knew that no matter what Garrett had done, this was still his brother, and grief was never simple. The funeral was small. A handful of people showed up, more out of curiosity than respect. Garrett was buried in the town cemetery far from the family plot. Silas didn't cry, didn't speak. He just stood at the graveside, staring at the fresh earth, his face carved from stone. Nora stood beside him, her hand in his. When it was over, they walked back to the wagon in silence. You all right? She asked finally. No, Silas said. But I will be. It was the same thing he'd said before. But this time, it sounded different. This time, it sounded true. The silver vein turned out to be everything Porter had promised. A mining company out of Denver made an offer. $25,000 for the mineral rights, plus a percentage of future profits. It was more money than Nora had ever imagined. Enough to pay off the ranch debts. Enough to rebuild. Enough to finally breathe. They signed the contract on a Tuesday in May. That night, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset. We did it, Nora said quietly. We actually did it. Silas nodded. He looked tired, worn, but there was something peaceful in his face now. Couldn't have done it without you, he said. We did it together. He turned to look at her. Nora, there's something I need to say. What? He hesitated. This marriage. It started as a transaction, a way to survive, but it's not that anymore. Not for me. Nora's heart started to race. I don't know when it changed, Silas continued. Maybe when you climbed out that window to break into Garrett's room. Maybe when you stood in front of me with a gun pointed at your chest. Maybe before that. But it did change. And He swallowed. I love you. If that's something you can ever... Nora kissed him. It was awkward, unexpected. Their noses bumped and Silas made a surprised sound. But then his arms came around her and it wasn't awkward anymore. It was right. When they finally pulled apart, Silas was smiling, really smiling. So, he said, does that mean... It means I love you too, you stubborn fool, Nora said. I have for a while now. Why didn't you say anything? Because you're stubborn, and I didn't think you'd believe me. I believe you now. They sat there on the porch, wrapped in each other, watching the stars come out. The ranch was still broken, still scarred, still haunted by everything that had happened, but it was theirs. And for the first time since Nora had arrived, it felt like home. The money arrived in 3 installments. The first came in June, $8,000 in bank drafts that Nora counted twice because she couldn't believe the numbers were real. They paid off the mortgage immediately, then settled the outstanding debts with merchants in town. What was left went into repairs. For the first time in months, they could breathe without choking on worry. But money didn't erase the damage. It couldn't undo the years of neglect, the burned barn, the poisoned relationships with half the county. The ranch was still a mess, and fixing a mess took more than cash. It took time, work, and people willing to help. That last part turned out to be harder than Nora expected. The second week after the first payment cleared, she rode into town to buy supplies. The general store was busy, women clustered around the counter, men loitering near the door. When Nora walked in, the conversation stopped. She felt every eye on her. Morning, she said, keeping her voice steady. The storekeeper, a round man named Bellamy, nodded stiffly. Mrs. Mercer, I need fencing wire, nails, and 3 sacks of feed. Don't have wire in stock. Nora frowned. You had it last week. Sold out. Then I'll take what you do have. Bellamy moved slowly, gathering her order with obvious reluctance. The other customers whispered behind their hands. Nora caught fragments. Killed his own brother. Blood money from that mine. She's as bad as he was. Nora's jaw tightened. She paid, took her supplies, and left without another word. On the ride home, her hands shook on the reins. They'd won. They'd survived. They'd done everything right. And people still looked at her like she was poison. Silas was in the yard when she got back, working on rebuilding the corral fence. He looked up, saw her face, and set down his hammer. What happened? Nothing. Nora. She climbed down from the wagon. They think we killed Garrett, that we're living off dirty money. Bellamy wouldn't even sell me wire. Silas's expression darkened. He say that to you? He didn't have to. Everyone in that store was thinking it. Let them think whatever they want. We know the truth. The truth doesn't matter if no one believes it. Nora started unloading supplies, her movement sharp with frustration. We need workers, Silas. We can't rebuild this place alone. But who's going to work for people they think are murderers? Silas didn't answer, because he didn't have an answer. The problem got worse. 2 ranch hands they'd hired quit after 3 days. A carpenter they'd contracted to fix the barn suddenly claimed he was too busy. Even Coleman, who'd been their staunchest ally, started making excuses when they asked for help. It wasn't malicious. People were just scared. Scared of being associated with the Mercers. Scared of whatever darkness had followed Garrett to his grave. Nora understood it, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. One afternoon, she was in the garden, one of the few things that was thriving, when she heard horses. 3 of them, riding up the road. She stood, shading her eyes against the sun. 3 men dismounted in the yard. She didn't recognize 2 of them, but the third was Robert Dannon's associate, a weaselly man named Pritchard, who'd been lurking around the edges of the legal proceedings for months. Nora's stomach dropped. Silas came out of the barn, moving faster than was wise. His bad leg nearly buckled, but he caught himself on the fence. "You're not welcome here," he said. Pritchard smiled. "We're not here to cause trouble, Mr. Mercer. Just delivering a message." "From who?" "From the estate. See, there's been some confusion about mineral rights. The land where you found that silver. There's a question of whether those rights transferred with the property or whether they remained with the previous owner. The previous owner is dead. His estate isn't, and his estate is prepared to file a claim for 50% of the mining revenue." Nora stepped forward. "That's ridiculous. The transfer was never finalized. The land is ours." "That's a matter for the courts to decide," Pritchard said smoothly. "In the meantime, we're filing an injunction to freeze all mining proceeds until ownership is established. You won't see another penny until this is settled." "You can't do that," Silas said. "Already did. Papers were filed this morning." Pritchard tipped his hat. "Good day, Mr. Mercer. Mrs. Mercer. We'll see you in court." They rode away. Nora and Silas stood in the yard, watching them go. "This is Dannon," Nora said. "He's behind this. Probably, but he's smart enough to stay out of sight this time." Silas's hands clenched into fists. "He can't win. The law's clear. But he can drag this out for months, maybe years. And in the meantime, we're broke again." Silas nodded. "Yeah, we're broke again." That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, their bed now. They'd stopped pretending months ago, staring at the ceiling. Beside her, Silas breathed quietly, finally asleep after hours of restless tossing. This was never going to end. Every time they climbed out of one hole, someone dug another. Every time they won, someone changed the rules. She thought about leaving. Really leaving this time. Taking Silas and disappearing somewhere Garrett's shadow couldn't reach them. But even as she thought it, she knew she wouldn't. This ranch was theirs. They'd bled for it, nearly died for it, and she'd be damned if she let some lawyer steal it now. The next morning, she rode to town again. This time, she didn't go to the general store. She went to the church. Reverend Michaels was in his office, writing Sunday's sermon. He looked up when Nora knocked, his expression wary. "Mrs. Mercer, what can I do for you?" "I need to talk to people," Nora said. "The whole town, and the church is the only place everyone gathers." "About what?" "About the truth." Michaels frowned. "I'm not sure that's appropriate. Garrett Mercer was a thief and a murderer. He stole from his own brother, bribed half the county, and tried to kill us. And now his people are trying to steal our land again. If this town keeps letting that happen, it's going to rot from the inside." The Reverend's jaw tightened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth, and people need to hear it." "From you?" "From someone they'll listen to." Nora leaned forward. You knew Garrett took money from the church fund. Don't deny it. I saw the records. If you speak up, others will too. But someone has to go first. Michaels was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. Sunday, he said. I'll make time after the service. Sunday came hot and bright. The church was packed. Nearly the whole town crammed into pews, fanning themselves with hymnals. Nora and Silas sat in the back, drawing stares and whispers. The service dragged. Nora barely heard a word of it. Her heart was hammering, her palms slick with sweat. Finally, Michael stood at the pulpit. Before we dismiss, he said, there's a matter that needs addressing. It concerns the Mercer family, and the truth about what's been happening in this town. The whispers stopped. Everyone turned to look at the Reverend. Michaels took a breath. Garrett Mercer stole from this church. $300, taken from the building fund over 2 years. I kept quiet because I was afraid. Afraid of what he might do. Afraid no one would believe me. He paused. I was wrong to stay silent, and I'm done being silent now. The church erupted. Church. People shouted, argued, demanded proof. Michaels held up a ledger, the church's financial records showing the discrepancies. It's all here, he said. And Garrett's not the only one who benefited. Sheriff Doyle took bribes. So did the bank manager. So did half the county officials. This town has been run by corrupt men for years, and we've let it happen because it was easier than fighting. That's a lie, someone shouted. It's not, a new voice said. Margaret Hayes stood up in the middle of the congregation. Garrett owed me money. Owed a lot of people money. And he got away with it because we were all too scared to stand up to him. But Silas and Nora weren't. They fought, and they won. And instead of thanking them, we've been treating them like criminals. Coleman stood up next. She's right. I was there the day Garrett pulled a gun on them. I saw what he was. And I'm ashamed it took me this long to say it out loud. One by one, people started standing. Merchants Garrett had cheated. Workers he'd mistreated. Families he'd threatened. The dam broke, and the truth came flooding out. By the time it was over, half the congregation was in tears. The other half was furious at Garrett, at the officials who'd protected him, at themselves for staying quiet. Nora sat frozen, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. Silas's hand found hers and squeezed. After the service, people approached them. Not everyone, but enough. Apologies. Offers of help, promises to testify if the estate tried to take them to court. I'm sorry, Coleman said, shaking Silas's hand. I should have stood up sooner. You stood up when it mattered, Silas said. Margaret hugged Nora. You've got guts, girl. Don't let anyone tell you different. Nora couldn't speak. She just nodded, blinking back tears. On the ride home, she and Silas didn't talk. There was nothing to say. They'd done it. Finally, actually done it. The town was on their side. The legal battle took 3 months. The estate's lawyers were good, but they weren't prepared for the wall of testimony that came crashing down on them. Merchants, ranch hands, even Sheriff Doyle, who'd decided saving his own skin was more important than loyalty to Garrett's memory, all testified to Garrett's fraud and theft. The judge, a stern woman from the territorial court, listened to 2 weeks of testimony. Then she made her ruling. The land belonged to Silas Mercer, unambiguously, without question. The mining rights belonged to him too, and the estate was ordered to pay court costs. Nora was in the courtroom when the decision came down. She watched Pritchard's face go pale, watched the estate's lawyers pack up their briefcases in defeat. Then she turned to Silas. He was crying, not sobbing, just silent tears running down his face. It's over, he said quietly. It's really over. Nora took his hand. Yeah, it is. The second and third mining payments came through without incident. By September, they had enough money to hire a full crew. Real workers this time, experienced ranch hands who knew cattle and didn't ask questions about the past. The barn got rebuilt. Bigger than before, with proper ventilation and a new loft. The house got a new roof, new windows, a working stove. The fences got mended. The cattle herd grew. The garden expanded into a full vegetable plot. The ranch, slowly but surely, came back to life. One October afternoon, Nora was on the porch shelling peas when a wagon rolled up. A young couple sat in the front, maybe early 20s, dressed in worn but clean clothes. The man climbed down and approached nervously. "Excuse me, ma'am. We're looking for work. Heard you might be hiring." "We are," Nora said. "You have experience?" "Yes, ma'am. Worked ranches in Wyoming before the drought hit. My wife's a good cook, and I can handle cattle, horses, carpentry. We're hard workers. Just need a chance." Nora studied them. They looked hungry, desperate. She knew that look. "Silas!" she called. He came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd been working on a new irrigation system. His leg was stronger now, after months of gradual exercise. He still limped, probably always would, but he could walk, work, ride. "These folks are looking for work," Nora said. Silas looked them over. "You have references?" The young man's face fell. "No, sir. Lost everything in the drought. But I promise we'll work hard. We won't let you down." Silas glanced at Nora. She gave a small nod. "All right," Silas said. "We'll give you a trial. 2 weeks, room and board included. If it works out, we'll talk about permanent wages. Deal?" The young man's face lit up. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. You won't regret this." "See that I don't." As the couple went to unload their wagon, Silas moved to stand beside Nora. "Think they'll work out?" he asked. "I think everyone deserves a chance," Nora said. "Someone gave us one." "We gave ourselves a chance." "Same thing." Silas smiled. "Maybe it is." By the end of October, the ranch was running smoothly. They had 6 full-time workers, 20 acres under cultivation, and a herd of 70 cattle. The mining revenue was steady, providing a cushion they'd never had before. It still wasn't easy. Cattle got sick, equipment broke, workers quit or caused problems. But it was manageable, normal. And normal felt like a gift. One evening, Nora and Silas were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, end of the day, after the work was done, just the two of them, and the fading light. "I've been thinking," Silas said. "About what?" "About expanding. There's good land to the west. If we could buy another 100 acres, we could double the herd." Nora raised an eyebrow. "Getting ambitious, are we?" "Maybe. Is that bad?" "No, it's good." She leaned against him. "Means you're thinking about the future." "I'm always thinking about the future." His arm came around her shoulders. "I'm thinking about it right now." "Yeah? What's in this future?" "More cattle, better irrigation, maybe a second barn." He paused. "Kids, eventually. If you want them." Nora's heart skipped. They'd never talked about children, never seemed like the right time. "Do you want them?" she asked carefully. "I didn't think I did. Didn't think I'd live long enough to see them grow up." Silas looked down at her. "But now, yeah, I do. If you do." Nora thought about it, about bringing a child into this hard world, this unforgiving place, about raising them on this ranch that had been built on blood and fire and stubbornness. "Yes," she said, "I want them." Silas smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Good," he said. "Then we'll make it work." "We always do." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. The ranch stretched around them, scarred, imperfect, but theirs. Hard won and holding. November brought the first snow. It fell quietly overnight, covering the ranch in white. Nora woke to the sight of it and felt something shift inside her. A year ago, she'd been a widow with nothing. Desperate, scared, alone. Now she was a rancher, a wife, a woman who'd fought for what was hers and won. She rolled over. Silas was still asleep, his face peaceful in the early light. Nora watched him breathe, this man who'd been broken and had refused to stay that way, who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd become her partner in every sense of the word. She loved him, fiercely, completely, in a way she'd never loved anyone. As if sensing her gaze, Silas's eyes opened. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning? What are you thinking about?" Nora smiled. "How far we've come." "Long way," he agreed. "You regret any of it?" "Not even a little." "Good." He pulled her closer. "Neither do I." They lay there as the light grew stronger, the snow-covered ranch waking around them. Whatever came next, good or bad, easy or hard, they'd face it together. And that was enough. The snow kept falling through December, piling up in drifts against the barn and turning the ranch into something clean and quiet. Nora had never seen winter like this, brutal and beautiful at the same time, the kind of cold that burned your lungs but made everything sharp and clear. She was learning that survival in this country meant accepting contradictions, that something could hurt you and save you in the same breath, that weakness and strength weren't opposites but partners in the same dance. By January, she was sure she was pregnant. She didn't tell Silas right away, partly because she wanted to be certain, but mostly because she was terrified. What if something went wrong? What if she wasn't ready? What if bringing a child into this hard world was the most selfish thing she could do? The doubts ate at her for weeks. She was in the kitchen one afternoon, staring at a pot of soup she'd forgotten to stir, when Silas came in stamping snow off his boots. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine." He moved closer, studying her face. "You've been weird for days. What's going on?" "Nothing." "Nora." She turned to face him. His hair was wet from melted snow, his cheeks red from the cold. He looked worried, and that worry was what finally broke her resolve. "I think I'm pregnant," she said. Silas went very still. "You think?" "I'm pretty sure. I've been sick in the mornings and I'm late, and—" She stopped, her throat tight. "Are you angry?" "Angry? Why would I be angry? Because we didn't plan this, because it's too soon, because—" Silas crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "I'm not angry," he said quietly. "I'm terrified, but I'm not angry." Nora buried her face in his chest. "Me too." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, neither of them saying the things they were both thinking. That they might fail, that the world was harsh and children were fragile, that they'd barely survived themselves, but also that maybe, just maybe, they could do this. That maybe the best thing you could give a child wasn't perfection, just presence, just stubborn, flawed, relentless love. "We'll figure it out," Silas said finally. "Like we always do." Nora nodded against his chest. "Yeah, we will." The pregnancy was hard. Nora was sick constantly, exhausted all the time, and her body felt like it belonged to someone else. The ranch work didn't stop just because she was growing a human, so she pushed through, doing what she could until Silas started hovering like an anxious mother hen. "You need to rest," he said one morning, finding her trying to haul feed sacks. "I'm pregnant, not dying. I don't care, you're resting." "Silas." "Nora." He took the sack from her hands. "Please, just let me help." She wanted to argue, but the look on his face stopped her. Raw fear barely concealed behind stubborn determination. He'd lost so much already. His father, his brother, his health. He couldn't control any of it, but he could control this. He could keep her safe. So she let him. By March, the whole ranch knew. The workers treated her like she was made of glass. Margaret Hayes showed up with advice and baby clothes. Even Coleman rode out to offer congratulations and a hand-carved cradle. "Made it for my daughter 20 years ago," he said gruffly. "She's got no use for it now. Figured you might." Nora ran her hand over the smooth wood, her throat tight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just raise that baby right." "We will." Coleman nodded. "I know you will." But not everyone was happy about the news. One afternoon in April, Nora rode into town for supplies. The general store was quiet, just her and Bellamy and a woman she didn't recognize browsing the dry goods. "I need flour, sugar, and coffee," Nora said. Bellamy gathered the items slowly, his face sour. When she went to pay, he said, "That'll be $8. Nora frowned. "Last month it was $6. Prices went up. Not by $2, they didn't." Bellamy shrugged. "Take it or leave it." The woman by the dry goods turned. Nora recognized her now, Mrs. Henderson, a rancher's wife from the next county over. "You're gouging her because of who she is," Mrs. Henderson said sharply. "That's low, even for you, Bellamy." "Stay out of it, Ruth." "I won't. She's pregnant and you're cheating her. You should be ashamed." Bellamy's face flushed. "The Mercers killed Garrett." "The sheriff killed Garrett," Ruth Henderson interrupted. "After Garrett pulled a gun and confessed to murder. Anyone with eyes knows that. Now charge her the fair price or I'm taking my business to Cedar Falls." Bellamy glared. but he adjusted the total. $6. Nora paid, thanked Mrs. Henderson, and left. On the ride home, her hands shook on the reins. She'd thought they were past this, thought the town had finally accepted them. But prejudice had deep roots, and some people would never forgive her for surviving what they thought she deserved. When she got home, Silas was in the barn mending tack. She told him what happened. "Bellamy's an ass," he said flatly. "Forget him." "It's not just him. Half the town still thinks we're cursed or evil, or let them think it." Silas set down the leather he was working on and looked at her. "We know the truth. That's all that matters." "Is it?" "Yeah, it is." He stood, wincing slightly. His leg always ached when the weather changed. "Nora, listen to me. We've spent a year fighting for this place, fighting for the right to exist. And we won. We're here. We're building something. And if people don't like it, that's their problem, not ours. I just want it to be over." "It is over. This?" He gestured vaguely toward town. "This is just noise. Ignore it." Nora wanted to believe him, but ignoring hate didn't make it disappear. It just made it quieter. The baby came in late August, 3 weeks early, and after 14 hours of labor that nearly killed Nora. Margaret Hayes served as midwife, barking orders and wiping Nora's forehead while Silas paced downstairs like a caged animal. When it was finally over, when the baby's first cry cut through the exhaustion and pain, Nora started crying too. "It's a girl," Margaret said, placing the tiny, squalling bundle on Nora's chest. Healthy, strong lungs. Nora looked down at her daughter and felt the world tilt. She was perfect. Red-faced and furious, covered in blood and vernix, but perfect. "Silas," Nora called weakly. "Silas, come meet her." He came up the stairs so fast she heard him stumble. Then he was in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide. Are you—" "We're fine," Nora said. "Come here." He crossed the room slowly, like he was afraid he'd break something. When he reached the bed, he stared down at the baby with an expression Nora had never seen before. Wonder. Pure, unguarded wonder. "She's so small," he whispered. "She's perfect." "What do we name her?" Nora had been thinking about this for months. "Clara. After my mother." Silas nodded. "Clara Mercer." He reached out one finger and the baby grabbed it with her tiny fist. And Silas, the man who'd survived a murder attempt and built a ranch from ruins, started crying. "I'm not going to let anything hurt her," he said, his voice breaking. "I swear, nothing." Nora took his hand. "I know." But even as she said it, she knew it was a promise no one could keep. The world hurt people. That was what it did. All you could do was teach them to survive it. The first year with Clara was chaos. She cried constantly, slept erratically, and demanded attention every waking moment. Nora was exhausted to the point of delirium. Silas tried to help, but he was terrified of holding her wrong or dropping her. "She's not going to break," Nora said one night, handing him the screaming baby. "You don't know that." "I do. She's got your stubbornness. She's indestructible." Silas held Clara awkwardly, rocking her with the same careful intensity he brought to everything. Slowly, the crying stopped. "See," Nora said, "you're a natural." "I'm terrified." "Me too." They looked at each other over the baby's head, and despite the exhaustion and fear, Nora felt something settle in her chest. They were in this together. All of it. The good, the bad, the sleepless nights and diaper disasters and moments of pure joy. When Clara smiled or grabbed their fingers, or did something impossibly perfect. By Clara's first birthday, the ranch was thriving. The herd had grown to over 100 head. The mining revenue continued to flow steadily. They'd hired 8 full-time workers and expanded into the Western territory Silas had dreamed about. It wasn't easy. Nothing ever was. But it was theirs. One September afternoon, Nora was in the garden with Clara, who was toddling around pulling up vegetables with gleeful determination, when a rider approached. Nora tensed. Then she recognized the uniform, a federal marshal. She scooped up Clara and walked to meet him, her heart pounding. The marshal dismounted and tipped his hat. "Mrs. Mercer?" "Yes?" "I'm Marshal Graves. I'm here about the Garrett Mercer case." Nora's stomach dropped. "I thought that was closed." "The criminal case is. But there's been a development with the estate. Robert Dannon was arrested last month in San Francisco. Fraud, embezzlement, forgery. When they searched his office, they found documents related to your husband's case. What kind of documents? Graves pulled a folder from his saddlebag. Proof that Dannon was working with Garrett before his death, planning to seize the ranch through legal manipulation. Everything you suspected was true. And more. Nora took the folder with shaking hands. Why are you telling me this? Because the federal prosecutor wants to make sure you and your husband know you were right, that you weren't crazy or paranoid, that everything you fought against was real. Graves's expression softened. And because Dannon's assets are being seized, that includes money he stole from your mining revenue, you'll be getting it back, with interest. Nora couldn't speak. There's one more thing, Graves said. Dannon kept records, names of everyone he bribed, everyone who helped Garrett. We're opening investigations into half the county officials. Your testimony might be needed. We'll testify, Nora said immediately. Whatever you need. Graves nodded. Thank you, ma'am. I'll be in touch. After he left, Nora stood in the yard holding Clara, staring at the folder. They'd been right. All along, they'd been right. And now, finally, people would know it. She carried Clara into the house and found Silas in the office, working on the books. We need to talk, she said. When she finished explaining, Silas sat back in his chair and laughed, a real laugh, full of genuine amusement. What's funny? Nora asked. We won, he said. Again. We keep winning. Is that bad? No, it's just... He shook his head. A year ago, I thought I'd be dead or in an asylum by now, and instead I'm here with you and Clara, and the ranch is successful, and the people who tried to destroy us are in prison. It's surreal. Nora moved closer, shifting Clara to one hip. It's not surreal. It's what we earned. Maybe. Definitely. She sat on the edge of the desk. We fought for this, Silas. We bled for it. We deserve to enjoy it. He reached out and took her free hand. I know, I just keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. There is no other shoe. This is it. This is our life. Silas looked at her, then at Clara, who was trying to grab the ledger and put it in her mouth. Our life, he repeated softly. Yeah, I guess it is. The trial started in November. Nora and Silas testified in 3 separate cases, against corrupt county officials, against the men who'd attacked the ranch, against Dannon's associates. It was exhausting and invasive, but necessary. And slowly, the truth came out. How Garrett had built an empire on lies. How he'd manipulated the system, bribed officials, destroyed anyone who opposed him. How Silas and Nora had been the first people to fight back and win. The newspapers picked up the story. Local ranchers expose corruption, one headline read. Widow and crippled veteran take down criminal empire, read another. Nora hated the attention, but she understood its value. The more people knew, the less power the old lies had. By spring, every official Garrett had corrupted was either in prison or stripped of their position. The county government had been effectively cleaned out and rebuilt. And the Mercer Ranch, once a symbol of failure and tragedy, had become something else, a symbol of survival. Clara took her first real steps in May, stumbling across the porch into Silas's arms. Nora watched from the doorway, her heart so full it hurt. This was what mattered, not the trials or the money or the vindication. This, her daughter learning to walk, her husband smiling, the ranch alive around them. They'd built this from nothing, from desperation and broken bones and stubborn refusal to quit, and it was beautiful, not perfect, never perfect, but beautiful anyway. That summer they threw a celebration. It wasn't anything formal, just a gathering at the ranch, a thank you to everyone who'd helped them survive. Coleman came, Margaret Hayes, the workers, the townspeople who'd stood up when it mattered. They roasted a steer, set up tables in the yard, let Clara run wild with the other children. As the sun set, Nora found herself standing on the porch, watching the celebration unfold below. Silas joined her, handing her a glass of cider. Hell of a party, he said. Hell of a life. He smiled. No arguments there. They stood in comfortable silence, watching people laugh and eat and celebrate. You know what I've been thinking about? Nora said. What? How this all started. How scared I was. How certain I was that I'd made a terrible mistake marrying you. Silas raised an eyebrow. Gee, thanks. Let me finish. She turned to face him. I thought I was giving up, trading one bad situation for another, but I wasn't giving up. I was choosing, maybe for the first time in my life. Choosing what? To fight, to matter, to be more than what people expected. She took his hand. You gave me that. This place gave me that. Silas's expression softened. You gave me the same thing. I was ready to die before you showed up, just waiting for it. And then you climbed out a window to break into my brother's room, and I thought, who the hell is this woman? Nora laughed. I was terrified. You didn't act like it. I was faking. We both were. He pulled her closer. But somewhere along the way we stopped faking, and it became real. Yeah, Nora said softly. It did. Below them, Clara shrieked with laughter as Coleman chased her around the yard, pretending to be a bear. She's going to grow up strong, Silas said, like her mother. And stubborn, like her father. Poor kid doesn't stand a chance, Nora smiled. She's got the best chance. She's got us. They watched the party continue as the stars came out, and Nora thought about everything they'd survived. The lies, the violence, the fear, the impossible odds. And she thought about what they'd built. Not just a ranch, not just a life, but proof that broken things could heal, that people written off as weak could become strong, that love didn't have to be perfect to be real. The world was hard. It had tried to crush them a dozen different ways, but they'd refused to break. And in the end, that refusal was everything. 2 years later, Nora stood in the same spot on the porch, 7 months pregnant with their second child, watching Silas teach Clara to ride. The ranch sprawled around them, bigger now, better maintained, alive with purpose. They still had problems. Equipment broke, workers quit, droughts came, prices fluctuated. But those were normal problems, human problems, not the kind that tried to destroy you. Clara shrieked as the horse trotted, and Silas held her steady. His bad leg braced against the stirrup, but strong enough to hold. He'd never be whole. Not the way he was before. But he was something better than whole. He was healed. Scarred, but functional. Damaged, but undefeated. Like the ranch. Like their marriage. Like everything they'd built. Nora put her hand on her swollen belly and felt the baby kick. Another child coming into this hard world. Another person to protect, to raise, to watch grow. She wasn't scared this time. Or maybe she was, but she'd learned that fear didn't mean failure. It just meant you cared enough to worry. And caring, fighting for the things you loved even when it terrified you, was the whole point. Silas looked up from the horse and caught her eye. He smiled, and she smiled back. No words needed. They'd said everything that mattered a long time ago. The ranch would keep growing. The children would grow up. Life would continue with all its complications and joys and heartbreaks. But they'd face it together. The widow and the broken rancher, who'd survived when everyone said they couldn't, who'd built something real from the ashes of everything they'd lost. Not because they were perfect, not because they were chosen or blessed or destined, but because they'd chosen themselves, each other, this hard, beautiful, impossible life. And that choice, that stubborn, flawed, relentless choice, was the only victory that had ever really mattered. As the sun set over the ranch, painting everything gold, Nora allowed herself to believe something she'd been afraid to believe for a long time. They were going to be okay. Not perfect. Not unmarked by the past. But okay. And in this world, in this life they'd fought so hard for, okay was more than enough. It was everything.